Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here. I'm here with Steve Hallock. Hey Steve.
Hey Ariel, how's it going?
Good. So we're going to record another episode of HourTime Experiments, and before I forget, don't forget to leave feedback, not just on how you like things. We're glad that people are enjoying it, but Steve and I know a lot of different things, and everyone that does the show knows a lot of different things. We don't always know the types of things that you are interested in as the audience. So in the comments, if there's topics you want us to elaborate on, let us know. Again, we're still sort of experimenting with the format. Like I said, we're very happy that things are going well and people seem to enjoy it. Don't just ask questions like, could you talk about this watch? Or I want to buy a watch for this amount of money, help me. That's not really the point. If we did that, all we'd be doing all day is playing psychic, and I'd have some type of crystal ball guessing like what kind of watch you want. I think the point of what we do is that there's so many watches out there, thousands and thousands and thousands of watches. It's a discovery process. I've never asked anyone myself what watch I should buy. Steve, have you ever asked anyone what watch you should buy?
No. I can't imagine doing such a thing. I love actually the fact of like looking back through my progression as a collector and the mistakes I've made and how I've come to kind of get here. But I kind of had to buy each watch and wear it for a little bit to figure it out.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the process of maturing and adapting as a watch lover, is to discover the things out there. I remember when I first started getting into watches, I spent countless hours on eBay and the internet searching, discovering, experimenting. And, that's part of what it is. So it's not that I'm trying to be lazy or I'm trying to be mean or rude or anything like that by not responding to people. But the question of tell me what to get is actually impossible. It's the same thing of somebody that I don't even know telling me, who should I date? Who should I marry? It's literally that subjective. And so while I do appreciate the fact that people trust our expertise and are coming to us with these questions, these are not reasonable questions, and we've tried to explain why. Literally every single day, we get questions via email mostly from people all around the world wanting to buy something and asking us, what should I get? And I think a lot of the times, I get frustrated because I don't understand what they're thinking. They obviously know there's a lot of watches out there. They know that they have particular tastes, yet somehow I'm supposed to magically know who they are. I mean, how do you approach this situation, Steve? You must have this problem all the time.
Yeah, I definitely do. I actually, this past week, had somebody email me and ask like, hey, I love your Instagram. I love your YouTube videos. I really love independent watches too. And it was basically like, tell me about independent watches. I was just like, oh my God, I have like 14.
Like you're going to write a book for them?
Yeah, I have 14 years of, my own experiences and thoughts and whatever in this. It's already scattered across everything I've ever done in the industry. It's really hard. I mean, I do have some kind of standard go-tos of if somebody says, I want to spend X $1,000 or whatever it is. I have some pretty standard ones within different price ranges. But, obviously that has to be varied person to person. You get an idea of what type of person it is, and I can do a reasonably good job of saying like, hey, how about you check out this? You might like this, but it's hard.
There's been people in the past that have recommended that we offer it as a paid service. I don't know how that would be practical or scalable or to ensure quality. But there are people out there that do that, right? Especially if you're a high-end collector, you will explain some things to them and they will take all their time to find it, and then ideally they work on a commission. These people do technically exist, right?
I don't know, honestly. I've never had one of them sort of really come up in my world. I've known people who have tried to do that sort of thing, but I don't know that they've actually been successful in making it a business. So I really, most of the time when people deal with me or people that I come across, nobody's looking to spend extra money. So I don't, and they're generally looking to cut out a middleman, if anything. I've never seen anybody who's too willing to put another middleman in.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's people that have tried it. I don't know that it's successful. I mean, I know it's a losing proposition. So at least what we can do is continue to educate people. So on that note, I wrote an article that was published a couple days ago called How to Spot Future Collectible Watches. Not sure if you had a chance to read this through yet. I want to just explain why it is that I wrote this article. Okay, so you know more about collecting vintage watches than I do, and you know that there are cycles of demand, there are trends, there's some perennial favorites, there's brands that go in and out of favor and things like that. We've talked about this sort of thing a lot. But that's really looking back. That's sort of being in this sort of position today where you get to look back and, in my opinion, make a much more easier choice about what from the past is still cool today. You know, because all you really need to do is put on, you know, a relatively modest amount of expertise hat, you know, whatever, and look back and say, like, what looks cool today? What has fared, you know, well in the test of time? What for me is more interesting, and I think that you do this a lot, and you probably do this very well, is looking at modern watches. And by modern watches, I talk about things made probably in the last 20 years or so that, you know, are in some state of demand today, either low demand or high demand, maybe no demand, that are going to be those hot collectible watches tomorrow. And I'm personally interested in this. I know a lot of people are. You know, what is your specific tactic, if you have one, maybe it's just a gut instinct, on taking a modern watch and thinking to yourself, this is going to be popular in the future, maybe not even during our lifetimes, but this is going to be cool in the future. Is there a methodology you have, Steve?
Yeah, I actually sort of structure all of my collecting around this, and most of the buying and selling that I do as well, because I tend to only kind of buy and sell things that I really like in general. And it is something that I pay very close attention to. So the way I like to do it is by sort of fitting things or seeing where things fit in an overall narrative. So this I get very much from my interest also in art and art history. And if you look at a period of art or the full history of art, it's defined by eras, and within those eras there's like a predominant narrative. So for example, if you look at abstract expressionism, you'll have to see sort of what the entire movement was about, how it came to be, the things that were going on in art that got us there, the things that were going on in the world and in politics, and, you know, all of these things affect everything. And then you have kind of this period that's defined, and what fits into abstract expressionism is defined. And then you have the pivotal characters and the pivotal works within there. So you look at, you know, maybe a guy like Rothko or something like that, and you can see why he's historically significant within that movement, and how his work relates to his peers, and how it also relates to people before it and after that. So I try to use the same approach when looking at watches, and my general hypothesis is that we are in one of these eras, that it started in about 98 or 99, which is the very, very early side of it. It might have peaked in 2006 or so. And it was created by things like the internet and forums and this whole, you know, different new production capabilities. But, you know, there was a big shift in the market, and watches and watchmaking shifted because of that. And I think we're in that era. So when I look at something that's going to be collectible in the future, I try to look at where does a piece like that fit in this era, and how was it a response to whatever came before it? How has it been?
Give us an example.
Okay, so for example, I recently sold a Harry Winston Opus 5, and
Exotic.
I don't know. You want to throw that up on the screen?
Yeah, let's find one of those. I wonder if it's even on Harry Winston's website.
I think, you know what, they still have some like bad pages for like past opuses. I mean, their whole website looks a little bit dated, but it's there if you, yeah. There you go. There's Opus 1. Go down more. Go down. Go down.
I like how, I mean, look at this. They have a combination of like Roman numerals, Arabic numerals.
And they're not in order. There it is, bottom right.
There it is, the Urwerk one. Yeah. There we go.
Okay, cool. So I actually recently sold 2 of these, which is kind of incredible in itself. But I consider this to be one of the most important pieces of this era. And the reason is that it's the last opus that Max Buser, the head of MBNF, was the CEO of Harry Winston Fine Timepieces, or Harry Winston Rare Timepieces, I think it's called. So it's the last one that he did, and of course he started the Opus series. And it's the one with Felix, who is from Urwerk. And so you basically have the heads of kind of the 2 most important, I call it contemporary horology, this sort of era. So you have the heads of the 2 most important contemporary horology brands working together on this piece. And then also, it really, to me, is one of the first, if not the first, pieces that really has like a ton of depth to it. Like you see, click on that second picture.
Which
yeah, this one right there. Yep.
From the purists?
Yeah. So look at how deep that movement is, and that the cubes are big, and the whole watch is basically structured around the movement. It's incredibly 3-dimensional. And I think if you look at the watches before this, even the really crazy ones like Opus 3, which was Vianney Halter, which I'm going to make you pull up a million things, but pull up Opus 3 quickly.
Yeah, Opus 3 was a pretty magical watch, to be honest.
Yeah, so Opus 3 is another one. It's legendary for a lot of reasons, one of which is that nobody could make it work for like 10 years, but it finally worked. And
7 years.
Yeah. I apologize to everybody involved, but see, this watch was crazy, but look how kind of flat it is compared to Opus 5. And that depth in Opus 5, I think you see it in a lot of watches now. It's one of the coolest parts of Richard Mille is the depth that they get in their cases and movements. MB&F uses that 3-dimensionality all the time. A lot of these companies, Urwerk obviously has continued with that. But aesthetically, I think it was a real watershed piece for the industry. And it was 2 of the like kind of best guys coming together right at the peak of contemporary horology. And so things like that, I think, kind of fit into this narrative. Now,
yeah,
whether I think go ahead.
I'm just saying on this post here, this is Ian Scallan's article from looks like back in 2005. This is this is the type of work that we appreciate from Ian, and I think what's interesting here is just going to what you're saying. I mean, look at this is again only 100 pieces, 2 different versions and 2 different golds. But the machining, the detailing, that had to go into these. Like, I think this post right here, shows to a small degree, why these things are just so expensive. But I agree with you that this was such a cool watch. But it's mysterious because if you look on the back, it says developed with Felix Baumgartner. He's just one of 2 people. It's him and Martin. It says number, it says out of 45, so it's actually confusing to you because even though it's 100, it's like 2 versions of gold, each 45 pieces. I think there was there was 10 diamonds on it. Was that it?
It's 45 rose, 45 platinum, and 10
platinum.
10 with diamonds. Yeah.
10s with diamonds. Okay, sorry, go on. I just wanted to because again, it's like you have to look back and these things are confusing. Like you don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, this is real hardcore collector stuff. Like this is not mainstream stuff, but I think that when it's just an example of how in my head, and this is where it's a little bit unclear whether this narrative actually exists or whether I'm creating this narrative. But at the very least, it is the narrative that I operate off of, and I look for these pieces that are very clearly within this framework play an important role. So that's how I go by this, and in my mind, if if wristwatches are totally gone in 200 years, which is a possibility, then none of this matters, right? But if wristwatches are still a thing and still a thing that people collect, I feel like if you look back on the 2000s, or if somebody puts an Opus 5 in an auction 200 years from now, that you can't help but look at it as an important watch. Whereas if there's a bunch of other things that we won't mention, and but you could put up, and in 200 years, you'll look back and just be like, ugh, like, that's basically worthless. Like, we don't want that. We don't care about that. There was nobody significant involved in that. It's not a significant piece in any way. It was just sort of made, and maybe it was a nice watch, but it's not a big deal, right?
Yeah, I think I understand everything you're saying. My worry is that this type of topic is getting slightly esoteric for some of the audience, and I'm not saying we should stop talking about it. I'm just trying to think about a way of explaining it to people, because I know exactly what you're talking about. When you're talking about this piece is like, the epitome of sort of like, collector bait.
Well, let me bring it back to reality then, because that same framework can go for a lot of brands and a lot of things. So I'll look at that, and you look at Paul Newman Daytonas right now that are worth, an insane amount of money, and most of it has happened in the last few years, but now that's the big collector's darling, right? And so if you're looking at modern Rolex, you think like, okay, well, what might be the modern Rolex that is a really cool collector's piece in another 30 years or 40 years or whatever that is?
Yeah, but let's be honest. A collectible Rolex. So I have here the Hulk, for example, which is actually a watch that I have now, the green Submariner. Mm-hmm. This, I agree with you. This is, and again, we put it in this article about spotting future collectible watches, because this is a particular type of collectible because it's a classic design with a little bit of a twist. But something like, the Opus 5, is entirely a different type of collector's product. Entirely. But what's interesting is that 40, 50 years from now, these watches, for whatever reason, could ostensibly have a similar type of collector's value, right? This watch, when this was new, how much was the Opus 5?
Let's call it $225,000. I'm not sure exactly, but
let's just say over $200,000. Probably not a stretch, okay? Now, the Rolex was about $9,000, right?
Right.
So but again, because of how the collector market works and demand and things like that, like you're talking about those Paul Newman Daytonas, those Rolex watches were like a few $100s.
Right.
That's what they cost back in the day. And there was, that was probably closer in value to today's, green Submariner that, has a roughly $9,000 retail price. Something like this has much higher, much more niche. And again, 30, 40 years from now, demand is going to play such a greater role and perception than what the original retail value is. And I think that's something that's very interesting about this notion about spotting future collectibles. Is that people need to understand that the retail price that a watch is at has almost nothing to do with its future collectible value. And what I mean by future is it's got to be at least 20 or 30 years after it was made. Because at that point, whatever it cost in retail means almost nothing. And so this Opus 5 and that Rolex, again, it's just in those Rolexes, there's be several, maybe tens of thousands or maybe even more of those around. It's not a high production model, but it's a cool model that Rolex will probably stop making sooner than later. There's a lot more of them, but again, we don't know what the demand's going to be like. So that Paul Newman Daytona, yeah, there's probably, I don't know, how many, does anyone know how many of those there are out there?
Boy, that's a whole can of worms in itself, and I'm certainly not the one to open it. But
let's just say there's more of those than there are Opuses, right?
No question about that.
Right, no question about that. Yet, those can demand higher prices than an Opus, even though, for all intents and purposes, pretty much any Opus watch, from a quality, engineering, effort, blows all of those out of the water.
Absolutely. Even a new Daytona blows those out of the water by any objective measure.
Yeah, and so, in this article here about spotting future collectibles, I bring up a couple of criteria, that people, need to look at. Retail duds is something like that, prototype watches, niche models and things like that people will only later discover. It's kind of like you're talking about those, artists and masters and things like that. And the old adage says that, only when an artist dies does their name become valuable, right? When their body of work is completely closed. And that's something I don't per se mention in this article. But I think what's very important to consider is the fact that, Harry Winston as a brand still exists today. They're still making Opus models. There was a belief that they were going to stop, but then they came back with the Opus, I think it was the 15, the one with the turntable style thing. And Urwerk is still around, right? So this thing exists in a world where the people making it are still around. Now, it's true that Max Booster is no longer part of Harry Winston, and this type of product will probably never be made again. But it isn't until there's a finality on the life of these products that the collector's market really starts to perk up, because the body of work, so to say, and the amount of pieces out there is now static.
Well, that's what's tricky. That's what's tricky, right? I mean, you go to, I'm from Baltimore, and there's at the Baltimore Museum of Art, they have a very famous art collection that's called the Cone Collection, and it's two sisters that collected like Impressionist art, and they were contemporaries. So they were friends with these artists, and they just happened to have a very good eye, and they really got it, right? And they ended up buying all these extremely significant works, mostly directly from the artists, because they understood the period and they understood who was significant. Now, I'm sure there were a lot of other people buying art back then, but they didn't totally get the framework of what was going on, and they didn't have the eye, and they didn't buy the right people, right? So that's why, to me, to really get it right, you have to develop a view of what the era is and what's important to the era, and that's difficult to do when you're in it. Some people get it right, most people get it wrong. It's a lot easier in retrospect. Now we can look back and we say that a pre-Moon Speedmaster, it was important, and a Paul Newman Daytona was important, and Patek chronograph perpetual calendars were important, and all of these things, because we see their influences already. But I think to really nail what's going to be collectible, you have to look at, and it doesn't have to be expensive, as you say, like a Swatch System 51 or something like that. That's a really cool watch. It definitely sparked an era, and it's its own thing. Now they're going to produce the heck out of them, and so I don't know that it might fail that test of it. But in terms of actually being a significant thing within the era, I think that to me is the best way to go about it. But in order to do that, you really have to kind of know what's going on and follow the industry as a whole.
So I want to bring up this topic that I mentioned, but I think it's important. In the article on page 2 here, I have the section called "Too Ambitiously Priced in Their Time." This happens all the time, and this is a very, very ripe area when it comes to future collectibles. So I have a picture here of the Eterna Kontiki Diver, which has an interesting history unto itself that I won't get into. But when this watch came out, it was something like, I think it was $10,000 or $13,000, so some very high amount that no one was willing to spend on this. The brand had to basically discontinue it and then turn it into a Porsche design one that wasn't doing that well. But this was such a cool watch, and now a lot of collectors really like it. Do you see watches sometimes that come out, they're very expensive, it's going to be a dud because they're too expensive, but because of that, in a few years they'll be floating around at a massive discount, and you're like, oh my god, if they were 70% of the cost, it would have been much better than what this is. You see that a lot, don't you?
Totally.
What is it about the industry where things come out which are priced so much higher than the consumer is willing to admit? Is it the consumer's fault for not knowing enough? I mean, it's hard to blame the consumer for that, but is it the industry's fault? I'm wondering exactly what it is where there's such a material disconnect between the price something costs and what the consumer is willing to spend. Maybe it just has to do with the fact that the industry itself is so boutique and so sort of niche that it just doesn't understand some of these bigger things. Do you have anything to say about that?
I think that's probably fair. I mean, this industry, more than many others, suffers from a real like echo chamber problem. Like the brands don't do, they don't really stay super in touch with their buyers and the market in general. A lot of people have the arrogance of thinking like, well, you know, it's luxury, or well, we have this brand name forever, and you know, whatever it is, they get a little bit too arrogant about a certain thing rather than really thinking through it, and they're not really held accountable very well. Whereas, you know, like a tech company now, if you listen to what these people are doing, they do everything off of data. You know, it's like constantly for every little decision on their website or something, like calculating what their users are doing and A/B testing and whatever. And a lot of these brands are run, you know, really like family businesses. And somebody says like, oh, I think this is a good idea. And maybe it's just like a passion project. Maybe the brand is even like financed by some, you know, just rich billionaire guy who, you know.
Rich billionaires.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you see, this happens in the watch industry. People buy a brand because they want their name on the dial or whatever, and they want to make a cool watch, but they don't totally know what they're doing, and they make it. And, you know, this sort of thing happens. And then it's also difficult because you can't make a watch quickly, right? Like, to make something good is a multi-year project usually. And so you also have to kind of guess what the market is going to be like.
Let's look at this Eterna right now here. Like, look at this. This watch is available for under $4,000 plus $395 shipping. What a deal on Amazon here. Okay, and let's see what the original retail was, right?
I don't know this watch at all. I'm happy that you're bringing it up.
This watch, I'll show you what this watch does. Okay, so first of all, the case was the most. Okay, yeah, so 12 grand, okay? And let's see, what year was that? It came out here, let's see here. Okay, 2008. Okay, this was kind of even before we were able to put prices, but you said 12 grand. Okay, so I'm trying to see if there's a picture here. I put this watch on. Okay, so here's an image. So what happened was the actual watch itself, the place where the movement would flip up, and it would face the user. And when you lifted it out of the case, that's actually what would release the rotating bezel. So when it was in the case, the bezel would be locked. The crown would also be hidden like that. So it served as sort of a crown protector. And that's essentially how the watch worked. And what's interesting is they modified it to have a power reserve indicator, which I think is really cool on a dive watch because, again, you know, if you're going underwater, the last thing you want to have is a situation where the watch isn't wound because, I mean, it will, of course, wind as you're moving it underwater, but not really. And so it's good to know what the relative power reserve is. And sometimes you don't want to wind it up all the way before you go diving because then that could increase the amplitude, and then you would have, you know, it would run a little bit fast because sometimes, you know, the ideal sort of accuracy zone is somewhere in the middle, not at the lowest point or the highest point. So there's reasons why you'd want this. The Porsche version took this out. So the Porsche version did not even have. Let me see. We actually did a review on this one, and I'll show you the comparison. I'm just sort of using this as an example.
This is a perfect example, though, just to cut in quickly, of, you said this watch came out in 2008, right? So this was a really good idea that somebody had in 2006 when you could make any crazy watch at any price, and people were going nuts for it. And then 2008, of course, is financial crisis time when, you know, the music stopped. But you can't start and stop production that fast on these things. So, you know, they might have been, that's not to say that this was ever a particularly good idea or a bad idea. I don't know enough about it. But you do have that factor constantly in play in this industry, that there is a pretty big lag between coming up with a product, especially if it's something that takes a decent amount of R&D and new tooling and stuff like that to use, and when it actually comes out. And so, no question, if anything that you see that came out in 2008 suffers from this, because it had to have been developed pre-financial crisis, which happened to be the very, very top of the time in the watch industry where any crazy thing at any price was going insane. You know, new brands were coming in every day with a brand new watch that nobody had ever heard of for 300 grand, and they were selling, 100 of them immediately. So
It's kind of amazing.
yeah, you got to keep that in mind, especially with stuff of this era. And people still do that, but they're just kind of tone deaf. But this, I don't know. I tend to give people a little bit of leeway, just because I was in and around it at that time, and obviously no one was expecting what happened.
Yeah, so I don't mean to be spending so much time on this particular Eterna, but I thought this was cool when it came out. At the time, Eterna was producing watches for Porsche Design. They have since stopped doing that. So it didn't work as an Eterna. It kind of worked as a Porsche Design, but still not. I was looking here, and the Porsche Design version you can get for about $2,500. That's an amazing value. If you really think about it, that's an amazing value, because this was an incredibly complicated case. It was cool. The Porsche Design one was toned down a little bit. They took out the power reserve indicator. I actually prefer the Eterna one because it has a little bit more functionality. The Porsche Design one is also cool, but like, there's a rich story here. I think we both agree that this was too ambitiously priced at the time. And today, several years afterwards, these are available, in a very inexpensive way. But my guess is that in the future, because of the complexity and originality, I mean, think of watches from the 60s and 70s that have very elaborate, complicated cases. There's not that many of them. And those ones, I'm going to guess, tend to be pretty hot on the collector's market.
Yeah, I think this thing's cool. I'm gonna take a look at this offline. I could go for one of these. I like it.
Yeah, and see, look how crazy this is, where the thing flips up like that, and you can just have it actually stands there, it sticks there, and it's just very original. But this is the type of thing I'm talking about. So, a watch like this, it was a special time, it was a special place. A lot of factors had to coalesce together. But it's not like Porsche Design came out and was like, here's our limited edition, or Eterna said that. Like, it wasn't about that. It was never supposed to be this type of weird product, but it ended up turning into that. And it takes people like you and me to track this, to notice it, and then to look several years later at what happened and be like, oh, excuse me, there's something to this design. Now, this is just one example of many, but this is the exact type of thing I'm talking about, because I think that there's a lot of underappreciated value here that didn't sort of meet with market demands. But in 30 years from now, no one's going to remember the market demands. No one's going to remember what the retail price was. It's just going to be like, what's this crazy watch and how do I get one? It's so cool.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, another great example of that, but on a higher end, but one that I keep coming back to are Girard-Perregaux complications, like their 3-bridge tourbillons, their minute repeaters.
Let's find one of these here. All right, so Girard-Perregaux 3-bridge tourbillon.
That'll work.
There's a lot of these, but these are incredibly weird watches. Are we talking about there's the Neo?
So
there's, which one are we talking about here?
I don't know.
Diamonds. I know Steve loves diamonds.
Yeah, well, that's kind of cool. I'd rock it. But
I love diamonds too.
Just in general, this has an amazing historical precedent on those watches. They're impeccably built and finished. They're gorgeous. You stack them up next to almost anything, and they come out very well. But Girard-Perregaux has done a really poor job with their brand and their distribution recently. You can find them at very deep discounts. I mean, look, we're still talking a very expensive watch, but at the prices that they're at, they actually are totally killer. They're like way better than most of the stuff that you can buy in that range if you can find one at the right price in an auction.
So here's an example.
Market.
Here's the this isn't the 3-bridge. It says 2 bridges, but this is their biaxial tourbillon. And one of the things that most people don't know is it's actually Grubel Force that assembles this for them, that makes that tourbillon. And that's like, if you know Grubel Force, this is kind of in its own weird way a budget Grubel Force. There's a lot of subtext to that, but, if you are a watch collector and you appreciate that Grubel Force's average price point is like, what, $600,000 or something like that?
Sure.
And you can essentially get one of their products for a lot less. I mean, this watch here, the biaxial tourbillon, and then they later came out with a 3-axis tourbillon. What was this? This was $500,000.
Right. 12
pieces in tantalum of all materials.
Which is cool.
When did I write about this? This was back in 2013.
Yeah.
All right. So let's guess right now. I'm just going to go on Google and see some prices. for the biaxial? What are you going to guess the price point is?
You're not even going to find the right price, though, because nobody's going to list them at, first of all, limited edition at 10 is going to be hard to find at all. But even if somebody had it, they wouldn't list it close to their actual cost. But I bet you could find one of those at some point for, 25 cents on the retail price.
It's actually, you're right, because I'm looking in here, this watch for sale, and it's basically hard to find. Here we go. Here's here's one on Chrono 24. So there we go.
That's listed at, what's that, 45 off or something like that on the retail. I don't know how good my math is, but that seems like something like 45 off. And I bet, if one really came up and, really was available, look, I mean, the other 3-bridge tourbillons, you can find them you can find stuff like this at 50 grand, something like that, 50, 60 grand for $300,000 watches that they're making. So I don't know. It's just an example of, you can definitely find some good stuff that, maybe the brand is a little bit mismanaged right now, but it doesn't really, as you say, in 20 years or 40 years or 60 years or however long, that's not going to matter. Like, people will hold up the object next to some other object, and it's either good or it isn't good. And so if you end up with good stuff, I think these are really, really, really cool things to have versus buying the brand that's super hot right now, but may not, but the watch itself may not matter or whatever. And then in 60 years, like, who cares? Nobody's going to care that the brand was hot 60 years ago, unless they happen to still be. That's what you have.
But here's the question. And, you're talking about these Girard Perregaux, and I agree with you. These are some very interesting models. But it still begs the question of if in 30, 40 years from now, this type of aesthetic is going to be popular. And there's a lot of things we don't know. What current design trends there are. If this matches with the current aesthetic that's popular in that era. We have no way of knowing this. So I agree with you that there's a lot of inherent value here that isn't being recognized by the market because of certain issues with the brand today. However, in the future, it's very difficult to guess whether this will increase in value or slump, because for the most part, even though it's cool, not enough people appreciate that. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, we're all guessing. If we all knew the future value, it would be worth that value, right? So there's a level of expertise, there's a level of taste, there's a level of risk, no matter what, and there's no right answer here. But
I think a general rule is essentially this: if a watch today is of amazing quality and you think that it will remain low, like it's not particularly in demand, but it's still inherently good value, you think that someone will eventually appreciate later, that is not by itself a good reason. Because we talked about the Paul Newman Daytona. That Rolex is not an amazingly well made product. I mean, back then, don't get me wrong, Rolexes were made in an okay way for the era, but compared to today's watches, it's a piece of junk, right? It doesn't have that exciting of a movement. What is it, the Valjo 72 or something like that? Some like extremely basic. Like, people sit there and complain about like ETA movements today. They're like, oh, it's just got a stock ETA. Well, that one really had some boring movement to it, right?
You know what? I know so little about vintage Rolex that I'm very, very scared to make any statement like that in a public medium.
Listen,
because I'll get ripped to shreds by the Rolex people. But
an exciting movement. No Rolex person is going to deny. No Rolex person be like, oh yes, it's finally made, haute horlogerie. It was a tool watch.
Of course, it was a tool watch. That's exactly what it was, and it's being collected as such, right? It's still not, even the people who buy them and pay hundreds of thousands of dollars for them.
It's a prestige thing.
Yeah, and they're not going to argue that it's haute horlogerie. You know, that's not even the point of that watch. But it is an icon of design, and they're fairly rare, and they're really cool looking, and they've got a lot of other things going for them. But you're right. If there are some extremely well made watches. All you have to do is look at a pocket watch sale to see how much craft doesn't always matter, because there's some incredible stuff by some of the best watchmakers in all of history, but because people don't really follow watchmakers that well, they're not that well versed in pocket watches. People don't really care about pocket watches that much. You can pick them up for a song. So you never know.
So I think we should close up this topic. Sort of my final thoughts on it, at least for you and I, are that we find it a lot more interesting to explore contemporary watches and guess about where they're going to be in the future, as opposed to looking at vintage watches, because I think vintage watches really plays, it's a lot more like investing in equities, because what you're really doing is trying to predict consumer behavior now based upon collector demand. But I think when you take a modern watch and you try to guess what it's going to be like in the future, you can't look at consumer behavior today. You just have to sort of think about yourself in the future. If I was a collector 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now, what is it that I would want based upon the things that are valued in a watch today? And I think it becomes a much more compelling intellectual challenge, and I think you'll agree.
I totally agree. Now, big topic of the day. I need to hear about the Olympics. You just got back from the Olympics, right?
I did. I went with Omega to Rio de Janeiro for the 2016 Rio Olympics. Of course, it's a long period, the Olympics. It's not a couple of days. So I went to see the opening, and I went to see a couple of events. And I really like the Olympics a lot. I think it's so lucky for Omega. You know, they started working with the modern Olympics in 1932 in Los Angeles, actually. That was the first year that Omega was the official timekeeper. And they've maintained that relationship every single year. And I think what's really cool about the Olympics is when you go there, I don't know what it's like on TV exactly, but when you go there and you see the events, there's only two names that you see as part of the sort of the displays and the signage and things like that. You see the Olympic logo. So there's the basic Olympics logo with the rings, the 5 rings, and then there's the logo of the event. So it would just be Rio 2016, kind of in this cursive, and then you have Omega, and there's no other names of any sponsors or anything like that at all of any kind. It's just the Olympics and Omega. And, you know, there's much bigger spenders. There's Cisco, there's Coca-Cola. Like, these companies are spending huge amounts of money, but their names are not displayed right there in the arena where the athletes are competing. And Omega has the ability to have their name there because they continue to be the official timekeeping partner. And what's interesting about this is that, you know, while Omega, of course, you know, is participating in it, Omega is not really in the business of producing modern electronic computerized timing equipment. They might be overseeing it. They might be helping set it up. But, you know, Omega is not an electronics maker. You don't just go to Omega store and be like, here's our sophisticated sports timing and measuring equipment. Like, I've never seen that for sale. So, you know, it's an interesting thing for Omega. It's extremely fortunate for them. And it's a beautiful thing because I think the relationship with the Olympics is a very pure relationship in the sense that consumers don't have to sit there and wonder, like, what's this all about? Like, it makes total sense. And I think Omega is very, very lucky. And each year they take advantage of this wonderful relationship by, you know, producing various limited edition watches. But I do want to say something about the Olympics itself. I did go last, not last time, I went to Sochi for the Winter Olympics in 2014 with Omega. And going to the Olympics is a lot different than viewing the Olympics on television. There's pluses and minuses. I mean, obviously the most comfortable way is to stay at home and watch it on TV and get to see the replays and everything close up. But when you're there, you feel the palpable energy of the competitors. The athletes really put their heart and soul into it. And I think that's impressive because I don't know, I'm not really a big sports person, but I've gone a couple times to see professional like basketball games and baseball games and things like that. And these highly paid professionals, they have a lot of concerns that the athletes don't. They don't want to get injured. It's not about sheer performance. It's about overall performance while staying uninjured, maintaining a certain this or that. It's mostly about money at that point, and not just the money for the players, but the teams, insurance, things like that. But when you see Olympic competition, this is the athlete trying their darndest to show peak performance, and they try so hard, and they're so happy when they win, and they're so upset when they lose, and they try to do the best to maintain good sportsmanship. And the emotions that you see when you're right there is the same type of passion that I think you need to get excited about, products like watches, right? Like they go crazy about it. It's so meaningful for them. If there's a brand that's associated with that, they're probably going to have very positive feelings about that because it took so much effort just to get to that point of being there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally does. And obviously, I've never been to an Olympics, and I can't even imagine what it must be like to watch somebody who's doing something that they will not get another shot at for 4 years, if they even get a shot in 4 years, and that also nobody really cares about for the interim time. Like they may be competing or whatever, but it's the only time that the majority of people really care about most of these sports. So I'd imagine there's no question that nobody's going to leave any gas in the tank during something like that, and it must be very intense.
It is intense, but being there, again, a lot of the times these are new facilities, oftentimes in third world countries and stuff like that. Like, it's not exactly a picnic going. I remember the opening ceremony, which again is designed for mostly TV viewers because there's maybe tens of thousands of people there while there's millions of people watching it. It's obviously going to be intended for TV audiences. It's a spectacle, but it's 5 hours long. It's really hard to sit there through the naming of each country. I'm sitting there, and I'm a relatively well-educated person when it comes to what's going on in the world. There's probably a dozen countries that were mentioned that I've never even heard of. Don't even know where they are. Somewhere in Africa or something like that. And every single country, doesn't matter how many athletes are coming from there, has the same little parade and pomp and circumstance. And can you imagine sitting in a I guess it was a football stadium, that's in Brazil, that's, made for soccer fans who are being there for 90 minutes or what, I guess that's the length of time, maybe a little bit more, maximum of 2 hours. And we're sitting there for 5 hours and it's just oh, get on with it. And then there's a lot of, the facilities just aren't really set up. There isn't really a lot of food to eat or, comfortable bathroom facilities. What you see on TV is really immaculate, right? Like they make sure that, the stuff which is, displayed on television is great. But what's sort of outside of that is not really as miraculous. I mean, and again, simple things like merchandising. There's barely anything to buy. The wait to the store in what's called the Olympic Village, which is one of several places where they do a lot of events. It's like a 20-minute to hour wait just to get into the store to buy very few objects and things like that. So I think people need to understand that the Olympics is really set up for the TV viewership. So you're having a better experience watching it. Going there is an amazing experience, but it's not luxury. Let's put it that way. But this is the watch that I really kind of fell in love with. This was the Omega Seamaster Diver 300M Rio 2016 limited edition version, and I'm kind of attached to this watch. Have you, Steve, been on an event that had a limited edition associated with it, and then all of a sudden, because you were there, you kind of fell in love with the watch?
That's a really good question. I don't think that I have, and I actually usually have the opposite reaction to these sorts of event-related watches. So maybe it's because I wasn't at the event or whatever, but I always look at these things and think who the heck wants Rio 2016 on their watch unless, maybe if I was a sprinter in it or whatever and wanted to remember it forever. But I generally get turned off by these things.
I agree with you. I generally am as well. But okay, so let's look at this watch. I'm going to do a more full article at some point. So if you look at the dial, right, you see some interesting things here. And again, this is how a limited edition can go really well or really, really wrong. Nowhere on this watch, from what you can see, does it say Olympics, does it say Rio. Nothing like that. You have the colors of the Olympic rings. The black would be, of course, the ceramic bezel. Then you have the blue, yellow, green, and red. Now, that could either be the Olympic stuff, which it is, or it could just be sort of a fun addition of color. And we know, not for all people, but for some people, taking a classic design and just adding a splash of color is a great thing. Again, going back to the green Rolex, classic design, splash of color adds a new dimension of appeal to it. And so that's kind of what we're seeing a little bit here. The dial kind of resembles the wave pattern, which is now discontinued in the Seamaster Diver 300M, but it's actually the pattern of one of the sidewalks in a beach in Copacabana. So I think they have here, there was a picture here I saw. Where is it? Okay, so this is the sidewalk. So it's essentially the same sidewalk pattern, but it's meant to sort of mimic to a degree the wave pattern. So there's kind of like a nerdy, like Omega lore thing going on there. And then on the back of the watch only, rather than the standard Seamaster engraving, is the logo of the Olympics. It's somewhere around here. I think we saw it before. More images. Okay. But that's the only place you'll see the Olympics logo is on the back of the watch. So there's like Brazil storytelling, there's Olympic storytelling, and I think that if you're the type of person that likes this core design and wants a little bit of a twist, this is a very compelling and certainly non-cheesy way of getting it. Does that, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I could see that, I guess. I'm more of a Speedmaster guy than a Seamaster guy, so I don't know if there's anything that they could do with this current version of Seamaster that would really compel me. I know that I do like that they only put the Rio markings on the back. I definitely would not want that looking at me all the time. So I do like that it's sort of a subtle thing. I totally like the addition of color in general. I think that's fun. So I like all those things. I'm not a big fan of this piece in general, but I like the idea.
You want to hear what's funny? I was literally exactly like you. I'm a big Speedmaster person. I really like Planet Ocean. And for years, when I saw this design, literally all I thought was James Bond wore this in the 90s.
Yeah.
Which is true. But then when I put this watch on, and actually the first time I put this on was about a week or two ago, right? I kind of realized why it's cool. Now, a lot of people on the aBlogtoWatch team, their first Omega was a version of this watch. And I always thought, like, why? You know, this is basically their entry-level diver watch. I think the retail price today of the most modern version is about $4,400, which again is not cheap, but you know, compared to like the Speedmaster with in-house made movement, which is like $8,000 or $9,000, this is a bargain, and this is actually less money than the Speedmaster Moonwatch with the manually wound movement and the acrylic crystal, which I think costs over $5,000 now. This has it's called the Caliber 2500 in the fourth iteration. So that's a coaxial chronometer, but it's a combination of in-house parts with some ETA parts. So it's kind of a hybrid movement before they went to full in-house with the 8500 series. There's just so much storytelling behind this, and the watch is damn comfortable and it's really legible. And what's interesting is it's very distinctive, right? Like when you see this, do you think of any other watch in Omega?
No, this is definitely iconically Omega.
Yeah, and so again, it's not for everyone. It's not trying to be for everyone, but this one was one of those watches that for literally my entire time of being enthusiast, it wasn't that I didn't care about it. I guess I didn't care about it. I thought nothing wrong of it. It just I didn't want it. And I don't want all the versions now, but now I have a newfound appreciation for it. I gotta say, even though the bullhead chronograph, and this is a weird watch. This is one that Omega had some issues with. And this is my biggest problem with this. Okay, as we know, the Speedmaster collection was about racing, right? Like auto racing. That's how it started. Mm-hmm. And every other bullhead chronograph watch you've ever known, has it been inspired from the racing world?
I would imagine so.
Yeah. So why is this a Seamaster?
Is the classic bullhead a Seamaster? I don't know. That's a good question.
It might be. But why would this not be a Speedmaster?
God, I don't know. I get so confused with Omega. I have a Speedmaster Mark IV, and I can barely tell the difference between that and a Flightmaster. They're very similar.
Is that a really weird case?
Yeah, it's the weird case one.
Yeah.
There's definitely a lot of crossover in the margins between this. But I have to say, this watch I really like. This is totally up my alley.
This is a Steve Hallock watch?
It's not quite a Steve Hallock watch. I don't see money coming out of my pocket, but I like it. I mean, I like the underlying watch. I like the color on this one. It's funky. I think that's a pretty cool watch. I'm way more into that than the Seamaster.
And see, that's interesting. I agree with you. The colors on here are cool. I think the core case The problem with this watch is that it was, I think the not the limited edition, that the standard versions of the Bullhead were like, I think they were like $9,000, and that's just a lot of money.
Yeah.
Omega did not do particularly well with those. Here we go.
It's a weird watch, right? Like this is never gonna be a mass market watch. It's a weird watch, but
look at that. That is a weird watch.
I like it. I think it's cool. And they're huge too. Like, people don't realize that this is a mass. Not only is it weirdly shaped, but it's massive.
It wears okay, but yeah, it's big. It's a tall $9,600.
Yeah,
that's
a lot of dough.
And there were limited editions, and you see the standard. Well, they're not standard; they're also limited editions, but they had kind of funky dials and things like that. So I think that Omega did a good job with these ones for sure. So for me, the Seamaster 300M is for me the Seamaster racing watch, whatever. And then there's the Speedmaster Mark II. This one came out late last year. This is kind of interesting with the colors of the various metals.
Totally nice watch. I'm down with it. It's real subtle. What they did with this one versus the standard one for that. So
now this Sochi one, this is a very un-Steve watch. I can never see you wearing this one.
Thank you. You're absolutely correct.
Who wears this? Like, when you see this, who do you think is the target demographic?
I mean, it's got that like cool vintage vibe, but I feel like
it's definitely a retro redo. Like,
why not just buy a vintage Cartier or something like that for that? I feel like it's somebody who just walks into a jewelry store and that's kind of what they like, and get
says,
sold.
"Do you have anything from 1927?"
Yeah, they just kind of get sold that.
There's the originals. Actually, here's a picture of the originals I think I took. Yeah. From 1915? Wow.
Yeah, that sounds about right to me. Like, it's cool. I mean, it's cool that they have that history. I just don't know why buy that watch. I would be remiss if I don't leave this discussion going firmly on the record saying I don't want the name of an event on my watch. I don't want the name of an athlete on my watch. I still feel weird about, like, having anybody's name on the thing. And especially when they're like living people. God, you never know what trouble these people are going to get. Like it must have been weird to have like the Tiger Woods watch, like right after he drove into the tree and everything got, crazy or whatever. Like, it's too much baggage going on a watch that's supposed to last forever. I don't know if anybody in 150 years is going to want to look down and see the Rio 2016 Olympics on their watch.
I tend to agree with you. But there's one that I thought was cool from a couple of years ago, where it was a Speedmaster where the sub dials here were like the rings. Do you remember this one?
Yeah, I've seen it. I mean, it's a cool idea. Look, if you love the Olympics, or also if I were in the Olympics, I'd be rocking this all the time. And everybody who ever asked me about it, it would be a perfect excuse to gloat that I was in the Olympics at some point. But
so. Interesting on that note, I want to say one thing was interesting. So Omega apparently did like a little bit of a survey of U.S. athletes, and they were basically asking them the simple question of like, do you know Omega? Like, are you familiar with what Omega is? And apparently not enough of them knew what Omega was. And then so Omega's like, hey, we got to do something about this, right? Like, we can't have athletes going to the Olympics and having the Omega name everywhere, not knowing what it is. And it's actually true, because when you see Omega in the Olympics, again, a lot of these people, these are young people in the early 20s. Like, these aren't sophisticated, like, luxury consumers. It's totally understandable that they would not know what Omega is. So when they see the Omega name, it doesn't say like Omega watches. It doesn't have pictures of them. Like, they could very feasibly have no idea what that brand even makes.
Yeah, there are people who are like literally like practicing archery in the woods for 14 hours a day for their entire life.
Yeah, like they don't have the money or the life exposure to know these things. So what Omega essentially did is something very interesting. At least for the Rio 2016 edition of the Olympics, and again, I don't know what other countries this applies to, but in the U.S., all the American athletes who qualified to compete in the Olympics and went to the Olympics, meaning they don't have to win anything, get the entry-level Aquaterra quartz Omega watch. So it's a 38.5 millimeter wide Aquaterra. Let me try to find this one. They just basically Omega gave this to them. So what do you think about that? Is that a good tactic?
It's kind of like a weird thing, right? Because I get it, like it's really cool, but then also, do you want to give them like one of the worst products that you that you make? Like that's how you want them to know of your brand, as like from the worst thing that you have, especially like big athletic dudes that they get a 30 some millimeter quartz watch. So I mean, I love the idea of it. As you were telling, I don't know anything about this stuff. I have no connection with Omega. They don't fly me down to the Olympics, so I don't know what the hell they're up to. And I was hoping you were going to say they each get like that Olympic edition Seamaster thing or one of those that you showed me, which was cool. Like, I'm rooting for these dudes to get all the free stuff.
That Rio one, this is what's interesting about it. Again, this goes to demand. It was a limited edition originally when it debuted at Basel World of 2016 pieces, which makes total sense. But apparently the demand was so high that they had to actually make the weird decision to increase it to 3,016 pieces.
Is it okay if I call bullshit, or do we not do that?
Listen, it's a legitimate thing to say, but again, I know that the Swiss are so OCD about things like that because they want the story to match that I'm guessing, and this is my perspective, I could be wrong, but I'm guessing that was not an easy decision for them to make.
I would guess.
I could be wrong.
In retrospect, it might not have been the best decision, but I don't know. That goes back to my entire, we just did an entire hour-long podcast of that. Like, I don't know if we're talking about luxury products, even if you're already making 2016 of something, even if demand is a little bit more, like, can't you just leave it at that and just like be happy with the fact that there's a product that people want and they can't necessarily get? Like, wouldn't that be okay?
Oh, I see what you're saying. So like, even if there was very high demand, they should have just kept it 2016. That's a legitimate perspective. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, Omega is probably, in terms of luxury watches, the top performer at the Swatch Group. And the Swatch Group, when it comes to the big brands, given the market, like, I don't think Blancpain is having a record year. Let's put it that way. So I think that anytime Omega has an opportunity to make money because of demand, they're going to be like, why the hell not? So I agree with you from a purist perspective and keeping the sort of like the notion of exclusivity important. They should have kept it at 2016. But
just for the long-term health of the brand and the luxury industry in general and luxury watches, like there's one like, I don't want to open a can of worms, but it's like, all right, are we going for short-term revenue at the expense of like the entire... If you fill every piece of demand that ever comes and also are producing so much that you can't even adjust to changes in the market, like there's no way a brand can survive like that. So I don't know.
I cannot even find the quartz version of the Aquaterra on their website. It's here somewhere. I don't know how to find it.
Well, they probably gave away all of them already.
No, but I'm just saying, like I really like Omega, but I really get annoyed at some of these watch brand websites. I mean, we talked about this, but like I literally cannot even find where this watch is. Like it's complicated.
I don't know. I'm just saying you pick 2016, make 2016 of them. If 40,000 people want the watch, just consider yourself lucky and let there be like, let them go for over retail on the secondary market or for a while, or you're gonna get that money back in spades in the long run, and people think you have, just in terms of what are they spending? How many millions and millions of dollars on PR and marketing and stuff like that? Like you'll make it up just in that to have a piece that people actually want and they can't get. So that's...
You know what? I don't disagree with you, and I'll tell you what. If I was an owner of that watch and I had to choose between there being 2016 and 3016 pieces, it would not be a difficult decision. Let's put it that way. I know very well exactly the amount of watches that I want to be. I want to be a little bit more purist on that end. So I agree with you. But it's one of the interesting things to talk about, because I think that, again, in the future, knowing none of what we're talking about right now, someone picks up that watch, sees Rio 2016, sees that it was a limited edition of 3016, is going to be scratching their head wondering, well, what's that all about?
Right. Because the only reasonable explanation of that is like, oh yeah, they thought 2016 was cool, but then they wanted to make more money, so they made 1,000 more of them. Like there's no like good explanation that comes off well from that.
Yeah, we can only wonder. Okay, so so that's that topic. So anyways, Omega, great relationship with the Olympics. It's a lot better. I mean, it's worlds better than the idea of like there's some sporting event that we just discovered and we wanted to attach our name to it. I mean, like that's the majority of watch industry relationships with sports events. It's a pure
absolutely.
commercial relationship. This is much deeper than that, and I guess that's kind of what I was trying to say. So if you wanted a limited edition, like I'll just choose. I'm not even going to name a name. There's just so many, but so many limited edition for X event watches is so much more bullshitty than something like this, because Omega's actually there. It's doing things. It's actually participating in an event. If you wanted a limited edition for a sports event, this is among the very few kind of pure ones. 2016 or 3016 pieces.
Absolutely, and I think we can all agree. I mean, we're with all that's going on in the world right now, and like everything. Like the Olympics represents the best of humankind, and like this is a great event with great people, and so I definitely love that Omega supports it. I'm sure the athletes all love that support, even if they don't know what it is. But if there's money flowing in, hopefully some of it makes its way to them in some way, and at least they get an Aquaterra out of it or whatever. And
right.
It's all good. I mean, there's nothing bad that comes out of all of this. I still
can't find the quartz version of the Aquaterra.
Let's just say it looks something like this, but it's probably got a black dial. And if the second hand were moving on this, it would be ticking.
Okay, and here's the thing. Omega has moved away a lot from producing quartz watches, but I like that they still produce a few. I don't think it's a bad thing. I know that a lot of brands like see quartz as like evil, like we're a mechanical watch brand, we can't produce quartz. I think that's kind of silly. I mean, like, in the new version of the X33 and the Z33, like those are cool quartz watches Omega made, but it's a whole other topic. Okay, so we're about out of time. Anything else that is pressing on your mind that you have to communicate, Steve?
No, I just want to reiterate what you said at the top of the show, that we definitely are reading the comments right now on YouTube. We're trying to hone this thing so we can do a show that everybody really wants to hear. And so if there are any topics that you'd like us to go over, then we definitely welcome that.
We are talking slaves is what Steve is trying to say.
Well, yeah, I mean, we'll still only talk about stuff that's like interesting to us, so we can make it interesting. But at the same time, like, we do want to be interesting, right, Ariel? Like we
are snobby talking slaves.
We're not trying to bore you guys, so
no, and we don't want to be bored either. And I think that that's one of the things that somehow seems to get lost once in a while. In sort of the context of what it is that we do, is like, why don't you talk about this? Why don't you talk about more cheap watches or this watch? Or why don't you have more negative reviews? I'm like, you know what? Why would I waste my time borrowing a watch from a brand, taking pictures, doing a video, only to sit there and slam it? You think I'm going to enjoy that review process? You think I'm going to wear that watch on my wrist and be like, boy, that's such a horrible piece of crap. I want to keep wearing it and reviewing it. No, that's awful. That's not what I signed up for. What we do is not like a public service of reviewing every single watch and basically talking about good ones as well as awful ones. If there's something which is awful, I'm going to pass it. I'm totally busy, just like you. It's like you sit there do you want to buy bad watches just to show people like, this is a bad watch, don't get this? No, it's an utter waste of your time, and I don't think it has a service to people.
Totally. So don't buy crappy watches, everybody.
That's right. Okay, everyone. This has been another episode of HourTime Show, still on experiments mode, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Boom.